Hello YouTube, I'm Drominicus, and this is Thorsday. And tonight on the show I'm going to be taking a look at the Japanese deity, Fujin. And for those of you who've played Final Fantasy VIII, you might recognize the name Fujin, and you will hopefully realize how it is that they put together that character after watching my video. So please, enjoy! Fujin is known by at least 3 different names. Well, 3 names that I've been able to find anyway. The first, of course, is Fujin, as I've been speaking about. The second is Shinatsuhiko. And the third is Kaminokaze. Now, Kaminokaze, literally translated, basically means spirit or god of the wind. Now, this naming of Fujin actually gave rise to the term kamikaze, meaning divine wind, essentially. So, yeah, there's a interesting little bit of nomenclature history for you. The depiction of Fujin is actually one of the more interesting points of his history. The reason being is that his iconography, his image, was essentially inspired by a Greek god by the name of Boreas. Now, Boreas was a Greek god of wind and would often carry a large sack or bag of wind. Now, because of the history involved between Japan and Greece, basically trade routes, a lot of trading that went on centuries ago, what had happened is that the image of Boreas was sort of transplanted into Chinese mythos for some time. Now, I wasn't able to find the exact deity that he was transferred into in Chinese mythology. However, from that Chinese mythology, he was then transferred over into the Japanese mythology and is shown as the image that we know him today. Now, he still retains the bag of wind, as Boreas did. However, his image has shifted greatly. He's more representative of an Oni, or a Japanese demon, with a disheveled sort of look, a face that is somewhat frightening anyway, and is very wild looking. So really the look of Fujin today was at least partly inspired by Boreas, the Greek wind god, through trade routes, throughout that time. So I mean, that's probably one of the more interesting examples of borrowing and inspiration from other cultures that took place back in the day with a lot of the mythology. So yes, that's typically what Fujin is shown as nowadays, is the usually black or at least dark-skinned Oni with the bag of wind around his neck more often than not. And he also has a couple of interesting things, one of which is he is typically represented as having only 4 fingers on each hand. I'll discuss why that is in the symbol section. But yes, that's certainly one of the more interesting portions of Fujin, is his iconography, his depiction, because of the fact that it was borrowed from Greece. When it comes to location, Fujin is simply a deity of Japan. He is not really a patron deity of any particular city, town, or village. He merely is worshipped across the country. So he has no strong ties to any one spot in particular, merely widespread worship. For the symbols of Fujin, there's really only 2 things that I was able to find. One, in his iconography, he is usually shown with his wind bag. And the reason for this, of course, being a god of wind, he has to have some way to show wind, and showing wind is often kind of a difficult thing, without like background leaves blowing or something like that. So, again, this is a borrowed image from Boreas, and it is the bag of wind. So he holds this bag of wind around his shoulders and is able to release it at any time he wants to release the winds. So yeah, that's one of the main symbols of Fujin. Now the second is the 4 fingers. Now, the 4 fingers are most often shown. I have seen a couple of images where he has 5, but he's most often shown with 4 fingers. Now, the reason for that is pretty simple, and it makes perfect sense. It's for the 4 winds. So the north, east, south, and west winds are represented by him having 4 fingers on each hand. So it's pretty basic, but it makes perfect sense. You know, it's one of those symbols, much like Kali's eyes, where each eye represents one phase of time, basically representing part of her domain. So yeah, those would basically be the only symbols that I was really able to find for Fujin. But yeah, that's that. The primary domain of Fujin is, of course, if you didn't figure it out by now, wind. Pretty simple. Now, the other domain I was actually able to find, it's kind of there. I mean, it depends on where you're looking, but he is shown sometimes as a deity of protection. Now, this would go hand in hand with the fact that he is a nature deity, and nature is sort of a duality thing. It can bring good things, but it can also wreck crap up pretty quick. Now, in Fujin's case, where he is the god of wind, Japan has a lot of typhoons, so I mean that's one thing that exemplifies the duality. I mean, good winds can help with pollination, good harvests, etc. like that, but it can also bring destruction. So he is a deity of protection in that people want him to protect them from the ill effects of his primary domain. So yes, that's the second domain that I was able to find, at least in part, that has been associated with him. As god of wind, Fujin was often worshipped or prayed to for good harvest. For protection, it was often to avert any sort of natural disaster. But also in the case of temples, he and Raijin, the god of thunder, were both put at the temple gates to act as protectors. So you would have oftentimes a statue of Raijin and a statue of Fujin at the temple gates to basically act as a protector sort of role there. So while they weren't exactly worshipped inside the temple, you could easily see them outside of the temple keeping a watchful eye. As far as the myths regarding Fujin go, the only one I was really able to find was that of his birth. Now, in this case, what had happened is that Izanagi and Izanami got together, had a bunch of kids, one of whom was Fujin. Now, when Fujin was actually born, it said that he actually let out all of the wind out from his windbag, and when that happened, it cleared the sky and the earth of all of the smoke and clouds, and the sun shone down, and it sort of formed a connection between the heavens and the earth. So his letting out the wind just sort of cleared everything up for basically set the stage for everything else later to happen. So yes, that's pretty much the only myth I was really able to find on Fujin, but I do hope that you enjoyed my look at the Japanese god Fujin today, and if you did, you know what to do. So anyway, do stay tuned for my other shows, and for the announcement of what's to come in Branching Tales. I'm sure you guys are looking forward to that. So anyway, I'm Drominicus. This has been my 7th episode on Thorsday, and hope that you have a great one.